Welcome back and thank you for staying with Morning Express. We want to have a conversation based on the developments happening in Glasgow, Scotland, the COP26 summit, where various world leaders and climate change activists are actually conglomerating to find better ways to deal with climate change, which is of key concern. Just closer home, we're reeling from drought, and ever so often we see one part of the country reeling from drought, the other from the adverse effects of excessive rainfall. Perhaps this puts into context why we really need to have this conversation and follow as well what these world leaders are saying at the COP26 summit. So in regard to that, we joined from Glasgow, Scotland. I know it's pretty early, and thank you so much for the sacrifice. John Kioli, who's an environmentalist and the chair of the Kenya Climate Change Working Group. He's been following up on that particular conference, and we'll get to interact with him. Asante sana. And we're equally joined right here in studio by Dr. Joram Kagombe, who's a deputy director at KEFRI in terms of social economic policy and governance chief research scientist. So gentlemen, many thanks for your time. I know this is your forte, but due to various interests, I'd like to begin with you, John Kioli. What's the latest from Glasgow, I must ask? What key commitments have been made by these industry players that we need to know back here at home during this second week?
Thank you very much for having me. Indeed, it's a good morning and greetings from Glasgow. It has been a struggle. Last 1 week has been a struggle, and this struggle has been there, not only today, but has been there for the last several years. As you may know, we are here in Glasgow to follow the climate change COP26 deliberations. We were surprised yesterday to hear from the US and the Chinese government that they are for the first time agreeing on cutting emissions from fuel that is coming from fossil oil. As you may be aware, according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, about 89% in 2018 of emissions was taken from fossil fuels. What that means is that if China, which contributes about 30%, and the US, which contributes also quite a big chunk of carbon emissions, agree by 2040 they will cut emissions, especially in the motor vehicle industry, in the transport industry, and this will be a very good announcement that they made yesterday, that they are going to, both countries are going to cut down the emissions significantly. And this resonates to the Paris Agreement that we promised to cut down our emissions so that we reach a target of 1.5 degrees centigrade. So this is quite a good announcement, although the details, again, are not very clear, but we indeed hear that the US and the Chinese government have agreed going forward that they're not going to fund fossil fuels, meaning they're not going to fund coal plants and all that. And this is quite very good. When you look at our Kenya's ambition of climate change, we have agreed to cut down our emissions by 32%. So this really helps us also in terms of the global picture of cutting down emissions and looking at the picture of cutting down to 1.5 degrees.
Okay, and I have to be speculative right here. The president of China wasn't there, and I think I can remember Joe Biden sort of pointing a blaming finger that this is an important event. So in terms of this agreement, is it not just by word of mouth? Are you sure that they will definitely walk the talk? Because that has been the key area of concern during this COP summits, that there's so much promises made, yet there's very little progress done in terms of combating climate change. What's your take on this, Kioli?
Definitely, and the details are the ones we are waiting for. Mm-hmm. And all eyes are on these two countries precisely because they're the biggest emitters. And we are looking at, first of all, are they going to continue supporting countries' projects around fossil oil, fossil fuels? And the biggest chunk is on funding, coal plants and funding issues around fossil fuels. Remember, 89% is a big chunk. Yeah. And if the two countries agree going forward that, one, they are not going to fund projects around coal, projects around issues of fossil fuel. And more important, you want to know that yesterday was a transport day. And this pronouncement comes in at a very opportune time that we are going about 40 countries have agreed to cut down, the production of cars that are using fossil fuel by 2040.
Okay.
Although there is no written pronouncements, I feel this is in the right direction and it will catalyze other countries to follow suit.
Well noted, Kioli. Thanks for that. So, Dr. Joram Kagombe, just monitoring what's happening on the other side of the world. And perhaps let's begin with that latest promise. How instrumental is the phasing out of fossil fuels and the production of fossil fuel vehicles by 2040? How instrumental might this be in the fight against climate change?
This will be very key and instrumental, as my friend Mr. Kioli has said, that fossil fuels are the main source of the emission. And so if we get to a level where we are using, we reduce on the usage of fossil fuels, we will have achieved a lot. And this, as you have said, it's something we have to wait and see, because there is a lot of technology that need to come in. There is a lot of changes that need to come in also in terms of coming up with alternative sources of fueling the vehicles. Maybe we have to wait and see. But this time, that means that the technologies have to be developed to match the promises.
Okay. And Dr. Kagombe, are we truly serious about combating climate change from where you sit? Not just in terms of the promises, but the implementation to date so far. Is there more being done apart or aside from the conferences?
I believe that if you read the documents, international documents, there are a lot of documents on issues of combating climate change. Go to UNEP, all the other bodies that are there. The documents are very elaborate. Even here in Kenya, we have Climate Change Act, we have Climate Change Strategy, and all that. But really, when you get to the local person, you even ask them about what is this climate change. The awareness on climate change is very low, and not many people know about it. And also, in terms of measures that go towards climate change adaptability, and even to the local people, it's very low. So I think we need to do more. And also, especially when we are even talking of financing, we get to a level where most of the actions go to the grassroots, because sometimes we may take a lot of time discussing in high-level meetings, discussing also in various high-level conference, but we also need to get to the ground, because that is where the action is.
Okay, and well noted. So, Kioli, has there been any talk on the conditions of financing? Because we well know of what was promised earlier, the conditions, the tough conditionalities came up as well. And what do you say about the actions in the grassroots? Has this been addressed, apart from the high-profile summits that are being held time and time again?
Thank you very much. I hear the cries of my good friend, Dr. Kagombe. Since 2015, when countries signed up to the Paris Agreement, our own country, inserted this in our constitution, and the Paris Agreement became one of the instruments that we are using to tackle issues of climate change. We were promised quite a good chunk of money during the Paris Agreement. Up to now, that money is slightly just above half of the money that were promised, 100 billion per year up to 2020. This has not been forthcoming. This matter of finance is a very key issue, especially on what we expect as developing countries. Remember, what we promised to cut down our emissions by 32% as a country was pegged to the issues that we are going to be funded by developed countries, especially on issues of mitigation, on adaptation. And as we promised to cut down 143 million tons of carbon emissions equivalent by 2030, we were pegging this, hoping against hope that we'll get enough funding to be able to run down our projects and our national climate change action plans. Unfortunately, as a country, we are only able to cut down to actually fund around 20% of that chunk. That means 80% is not able to be funded. And this is one of the challenges we have here in Glasgow, that there's so much promise, but when you come on the ground, there is a challenge. One of the biggest challenges is what we call double accounting, that as a country, we've been receiving money around ODA, and this money should continue. Money around issues of COVID-19 should continue. In and above that money, we need to get money for climate change. And I think this is where the rubber meets the road, that we have not been receiving as promised in the Paris Agreement, as promised in COP25, as promised by these leaders in these forums. So when you look at the issues on the ground, you find that issues of adaptation, people are still lying dead because of famine. People are still not having water. We are thirsty. We need our flocks, our livestock to have pasture. We need our rivers back, because we believe on and above what we've been having challenges in Kenya, we still have things that we can apportion to climate change. And this is why we are saying there's loss and damage on our issues as a country. Okay. And we need that person that is responsible to be able to pay up for the issues and the damages that has been caused. Okay. We have agreed as a country that we need support for these matters.
And that's well noted. Dr. Kagombe, from where you sit, does there need to be consequences to not fulfilling these promises? Because the previous unfulfilled promises might cast aspersions to some of these promises that will be made during the COP26 summit. The key findings, we've heard of maybe US and China getting on board to cut back on fossil fuel production in motor vehicles. How sure are we that they'll walk the walk? Back to that same question.
The consequences are there because, of course, if you read various documents, there is very good elaboration of the consequence of no action. And so if we do no action, there are consequences. The temperatures will continue increasing. We'll find more emissions continuing. And one of the things is the issues of climate change affect the most vulnerable members of the society. And these are the poor, even the youth. You find that these are the people who will not have alternatives. Because the rich will, if you are talking of right now, we have had seasons which we have been expecting rains and we don't have rain. And the other people who have money will go for irrigated agriculture. But the poor will not have alternatives. So there are consequences. And so I think we need to get to a level of trying to see how do we solve this issue of financing. And one of the things, besides waiting for the donors who may come in, let's also have private sector engagement. The private sector is key to this, that we should have more of our companies realizing the danger we are in and coming up with the climate change measures within their corporate, when they are doing their business. And we appreciate there are some companies which are already doing that, but we need more of this, such that we have a public-private, public-private sector partnership and we go through this journey together.
Okay.
Because we cannot also sit and just wait for the international community. Let's also have our own small actions as we wait for the bigger action from the international community.
Okay, well noted. Kioli, back to you, and let's talk about setting short-term targets to cut carbon emissions. It featured prominently during the discussion. So how important is the annual emissions cut of 7%? Are we any closer to ensuring these global targets are met?
These global targets are depending on very key issues. As I said, we have promised as a country to cut down 32%, but we can only fund 20% of those activities around cutting down emissions. And I think we have two ways that we can follow this. And I agree with Dr. Kagombe that as a country, we need to have homegrown solutions. In the Climate Change Act of 2016, this act has given the counties a mandate to activate issues around climate change. And one of the things is that the counties need to have a basket of money in their funding so that they can put aside like 2% of their money on climate change, of their funding annually, so that they can do like solarization of their boreholes. They can retrofit systems that are not fit in this era of climate change. They can have boreholes, dams, they can have systems that can support our livelihoods. I agree that we have challenges with money, but we need to have homegrown solutions. And we need to agree that as we wait for international funding, we need to move ahead and be able to know that as counties, we have a responsibility to put aside some money. As we put developmental money, we need to put money for climate change that can be able to safeguard our communities. We know that this is a long-term project. We have to cut down emissions, but we need to look at adaptations. What methods are we using in issues of agriculture? You all know that our country relies on the tourism. Our tourism, fortunately or unfortunately, is a nature-based tourism, meaning that the tourists come to see our wildlife, come to enjoy our beaches, come to enjoy our environment. And if this is shaken, then as a country, we are going to lose a lot. And what that means is that counties, especially in the areas of coastal regions, in the areas that we get tourists, need to put some money around climate change so that they can safeguard our economy, which is dependent on the climate change. In agriculture, we need to know that any increase of even 1% will affect our tea sector. It will affect our coffee sector. And what that means is that if we don't do anything, then we are going to lose as a country. So as we wait for the streaming of money from international sources, we need to agree that we have a responsibility as a country to put our resources to mainstream our National Climate Change Action Plan, to be able to implement our National Climate Change Act so that we can attain what we agreed as a country to safeguard our people.
Okay, well noted. And I'm pretty sure the workload on your side right there at Glasgow is a lot. Bearing in mind last year, due to COVID-19, that particular summit was postponed and the delegates failed to sort of own up to the promises virtually until they met. So I hope we'll get a little more from the conference. But back to you, Dr. Kagombe. The process itself is quite daunting, and we've highlighted some of the challenges in terms of achieving these all ambitious goals. Let's talk about how these world bodies can actually play a part in achieving this goal. The United Nations, African Union as well. How instrumental are they in terms of achieving or helping their member countries achieve this all-important goal? From where you sit, sir?
Yeah, the world bodies, they are key because when the discussions are held in Glasgow, you find the world body is also instrumental in guiding even the implementation, developing strategies, and also working with the national government to be able to implement. And one of the things is, even when we talk of the promises which are being done, there are also processes of tapping into these finances. So you find the world bodies when they are there and they are guiding, UNEP and the others, they will be very crucial in working with the national government to a point that the national government and also the communities, also the private sector, can tap into these resources. And also there are standards which are required for you to engage in some of these processes. And so there's a lot of capacity building that is required to achieve, to have resource persons who can actually certify these standards. Because you find some of the processes, you find that we don't have certifiers who are locally based. And so we need to build our capacities of our people to be able to drive the issues of climate change.
Okay, well noted. Kioli, back to you, and quite briefly, is there a way that nations actually report the progress they've already made? So we're not just looking forward, we're equally looking backward in terms of the progress made and making informed decisions out of them. Talk to us about this.
I'm aware that there's quite a progress, a lot of progress. And what is significant is that both developing countries and developed countries have agreed that climate change affects both of us. And we have agreed as developing countries that we have our share that we need to fulfill. And that's why we agreed we have the nationally determined contributions. As we wait for the polluter to pay us, we also have things that we need to do as developing countries. And what we have agreed and what we are alive to is that we need to do something from our end in terms of ending issues of climate change. It's a big promise, okay. It's a big challenge, but we agree that as a country, especially in Kenya, we have champions, we have documents that we need to really implement. We have our Wanjiku that needs a solar lantern just to continue with our life. We need to put equity in terms of climate change. We need to redefine when we say people have access to electricity.
Okay.
What does that mean? Does it mean electricity just for lighting? Does it mean electricity to do any other thing? Are we able to even put our vaccines safely? Because our mothers need to deliver day or night. Our clinics need to be to have electricity. Solar and other off-grid solutions come in handy in terms of climate change. Our mothers are still using open fires for cooking, and we need to have renewable, accessible. We need to have GECOs, which are better put in terms of climate change so that they can use less firewood. As we look for renewable, we need to realize that 80-something% of our Kenyans are still using biomass energy. So we need to also invest in issues of energy efficiency as a very major issue as we move to renewable energy. So the responsibility is both with us and the developed countries. Thank you.
Well noted. And Daktari, as we finalize on this, there was equally the promise of world leaders sort of cutting back and stopping deforestation by 2030. And I know you're from KEFRI, so perhaps this might, hit closer home. And in terms of what KEFRI is doing in order to get to that goal of 10% tree cover right here in Kenya, talk to us about the efforts made locally in order to plug in into this global discussion of averting climate change consequences. Talk to us, Daktari.
Yeah, KEFRI is, we do research in forestry and other natural resources, and we give technical backstopping to forest sector on issues of forestry. And so when it comes to issues of forest cover in this country, you are aware that we are now at about 6% and we need to get to 10%. So there are